Excuse me, sir. I think there's an error in your numbers.
A waitress is correcting my math? Solve it. $50,000 if you can.
Get one decimal wrong, and you'll never work in the city.
That's not standard, that's elegant.
Your projected losses are 15%, they triple. Shoot. Someone manually changed the constant. This page was built to fail. You rigged the test!
Miss Carter, collect your things. You're finished here.
I'll give her a problem no one in the Solve It for 3 years. Where did you study?
I didn't.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to continue the story. At Black Voice Stories, every story reveals a deeper truth about life, courage, and humanity. Subscribe now, and let's continue this incredible journey together.
Excuse me, sir. I think there's an error in your numbers. Danny Carter said it quietly, the way she said everything in that dining room. And Nathaniel Cross turned around, like the sound itself had offended him. A waitress, in a stained apron, correcting his math in front of 30 guests. He set down his glass. "People like you can barely balance a checkbook," he said. "I dare you. Solve it. $50,000 if you can." Somebody laughed near the bar. Somebody else lifted a phone. Nobody in that room said stop. Danny reached out and took the marker from his hand, and the confidence on Nathaniel Cross's face would not survive the next 40 minutes. Nobody there had any idea what was coming. The Ashcombe room sat on the top floor of the Larkspur Hotel in downtown Austin, Texas, 11 stories above Congress Avenue, where the windows caught the last orange light of a June evening at 7:52 p.m. It was not built for ordinary dinners. It was built for verdicts, for the kind of Texas old money and new tech wealth that liked to remind each other, quietly, exactly where they stood. Crystal stemware, linen the color of fresh cream, a wine list that started at $412 a bottle. The staff moved through it like furniture, trained since their first shift to be seen and never noticed. Danny had worked there for 3 years. She was 27 years old, and she had been invisible for most of her life. Her mother, Renee Carter, raised Danny and her younger sister Tasha alone in a 2-bedroom apartment off East Riverside, working double shifts as a hospital janitor after Danny's father left before Tasha was even born. Renee never once complained in front of her daughters. She just kept working. When Renee died of a stroke at 44, there was no life insurance, no savings, only a stack of unpaid bills, and a 15-year-old girl named Tasha who needed somebody to keep the lights on. Danny was 19. She dropped out of community college the same week of the funeral. She picked up 2 jobs, then 3, and every single night after Tasha fell asleep, on the pull-out couch, Danny sat on the kitchen floor with library books stacked around her like sandbags. Calculus, linear algebra, number theory. She watched university lectures on a phone with a spiderwebbed screen until her eyes burned red, and she filled a 90-cent spiral notebook front to back, then flipped it over and filled it again from the other side. Nobody taught her. Nobody graded her. She just could not stop. Nobody at the Ashcombe room knew any of that. To the head chef, she was the quiet one who never talked back. To the sommelier, she was somebody who probably thought a Bordeaux was just red wine in a fancy bottle. She heard these things. She always heard them. She never once answered back, because a girl who is the only income in a household learns early that dignity is a luxury you ration. Tonight, the room had been booked private for an investor showcase, hosted by Nathaniel Cross, founder and CEO of Cross Capital Partners, a man Forbes had valued at $3.8 billion that spring. Wall Street called him the Anvil, not because he built anything, but because of what happened to companies that ended up underneath him. Cross had built an entire public persona around one belief, repeated in interviews and op-eds. and a self-funded think tank paper. That intelligence was something you were born with, not something you built. He never said the rest of it out loud on camera, but everyone in that room understood exactly who he meant when he said it. 31 guests filled the private dining room that night. Hedge fund managers, 2 state legislators, a university regent, the kind of crowd that measured a stranger's worth by the label on their shoes before the conversation even started. Danny moved between the tables, refilling water glasses, replacing silverware, keeping her eyes on the floor, the way 3 years of training had taught her. 40 minutes into the evening, Cross snapped 2 fingers at her without turning his head. "You, more ice." She brought the ice. He did not say thank you. 10 minutes after that, she reached across the table to clear a dessert plate, and Cross pulled his napkin away from her hand like she carried something contagious. "Don't touch anything of mine," he said. "I don't know where those hands have been." A man beside him laughed into his scotch. Danny said nothing. She stepped back. She kept moving, because the rent was due on the 4th, and Tasha's braces needed a second payment by Friday. Cross had wheeled in a whiteboard beside the head of the table, the centerpiece of his pitch, a proprietary risk model his research team had spent 14 months building, something he called the Sentinel. He claimed it predicted market downturns with 93% accuracy. 2 cameras from a financial streaming outlet sat on tripods near the wall, recording every word for an audience Cross very much wanted watching. Danny carried a tray of appetizers past the whiteboard. She was not supposed to look. She looked anyway, and, in the half-second, her eyes crossed the board. She caught a variance coefficient flipped in the wrong direction on the 3rd line of the model, the kind of error that would quietly inflate every projected return by close to 18%. She kept walking. She set the tray down. She came back, and the number was still wrong, sitting in the middle of a $4 billion presentation like a crack running straight through a diamond. Every year of Danny's life had taught her the same lesson. Keep your head down. Don't make waves. Survive the shift. But she had never once in her life been able to walk past a wrong number, and this one would not leave her alone. "Excuse me, sir." That was the moment everything in that room changed. "The variance coefficient on the 3rd line," Danny said, her voice low and steady. "The sigma and the mu values are transposed." Nobody moved. Cross blinked once, then laughed, a short, dry sound, and looked around the table, waiting for the room to join him. A few people did. Somebody near the window muttered, "Is this a joke?" "Let me get this straight," Cross said, folding his arms and turning to face her fully. "A waitress who makes less in a year than I spend on watches is telling me my team of quants from Wharton and MIT got it wrong." "I'm not talking about your team, sir," she said. "I'm talking about the number on the board. And what exactly qualifies you to talk about numbers at all?" he said, stepping closer. "Did they teach you statistics between bussing tables?" A woman near the back shook her head and whispered something to her husband. He nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Somebody should call her manager," he said, loud enough to hear. "The transposition changes the tail risk projection," Danny continued, her hands steady even as her pulse climbed. "Run the model with those values, and it overstates returns by roughly 18%. Every investor in this room would be making decisions off inflated numbers." The laughter did not stop all at once. It drained out of the room the way color drains from a face. A silver-haired investor near the front, a man named Walter Higgins, who managed close to $9 billion in pension assets, opened his laptop, typed for a moment, frowned, and looked up not at Cross, but at Danny. Cross saw it. He felt the room tilt away from him by an inch, and that inch was more than he could stand. "This is absurd," he said, louder now. "You're a waitress. You do not walk up to a $4 billion model and pretend to understand it. You overheard something. That's all this is." "I read it, sir," Danny said. "I didn't overhear anything. I read it." He repeated her words back mockingly to the table. She read it. "Ladies and gentlemen, the waitress reads quantitative finance." More laughter, louder this time. Somebody clapping twice like it was a punchline. Cross grabbed a marker off the tray beneath the whiteboard and wrote out a longer equation, dense with nested integrals and conditional probabilities, the kind of problem his own research team took days to model. He held the marker out toward her. "Solve it," he said. "Right now, in front of everyone. If you can't, you walk out that door tonight with no job and no reference, and you never come near this hotel again." Danny looked at the equation. She looked at the marker. She looked at 31 faces and 2 blinking red camera lights, and somewhere behind all of it, she pictured Tasha at home on the couch, 14 years old, watching whatever came next on a phone screen. Then she took the marker. "Okay," she said. Cross smiled the way a man smiles when he has already decided how a story ends, and turned to his guests with both hands spread wide. "Watch this." He had no idea what he had just started. Danny uncapped the marker. The smell of dry erase ink hit her. Sharp and familiar, the same smell as 100 nights spent writing on the fogged bathroom mirror of a public library after closing time because there was nowhere else quiet enough to think. She looked at Cross's equation, nested integrals wrapped around conditional probability functions, feeding into a Monte Carlo output matrix built specifically to make a stranger freeze. Danny did not freeze. She started at the top. Her handwriting was small and exact, nothing like the bold, showy strokes Cross had used. She isolated the stochastic variable first, pulled it clean out of the nested integral, rewrote the boundary conditions in 4 lines that told anyone watching whether she understood the structure of the thing or was simply guessing. A junior analyst 2 tables back leaned forward so fast his chair creaked. He recognized the move. It was a dimensional reduction technique he had only ever seen in a graduate seminar. "That's not standard," he whispered to the woman beside him. "That's elegant." Then Danny stopped. Her marker hovered over a small cluster of numbers near the bottom of Cross's original board, a decay constant buried inside a summation. "This is wrong too," she said quietly. "The constant is set at 0.091, but the asset class you're modeling, high-yield corporate debt, has a historical default decay closer to 0.054. You've inflated the decay rate, which compresses the tail distribution and makes the whole model look far more stable than it is. When the correction runs through, your projected losses in a downturn triple. Not 15%, closer to 41. Nobody in the room breathed. Cross uncrossed his arms. "That figure was verified by 12 PhDs on my research staff," he said. "You're telling me you know better than 12 PhDs? "I'm telling you the number is wrong, sir," Danny said, still facing the board. "Based on what your waitressing degree," he said, and the laughter that followed had noticeably fewer people in it than before. Walter Higgins stood, walked to the board, adjusted his glasses, and traced her work line by line with one finger. A minute passed. Then he turned to Cross and said two words that hit the room like a dropped plate. "She's right." Cross's jaw tightened. "That's one error," he said. "Anyone can find one mistake if they stare long enough." "It is not one error, sir," Danny said, and drew 3 arrows, connecting the decay constant to the correlation matrix to the final output, circling every wrong number along the way. The board behind her began to look less like a presentation and more like the aftermath of something. Higgins closed his laptop. He did not need it anymore. Cross should have let it go there. A smarter man would have laughed it off, called it a party trick, and moved on with his evening. Nathaniel Cross was not a smart man. He was a proud one. "One equation doesn't make you a genius," he said, standing now, jacket unbuttoned. He turned to his chief financial officer, a thin, nervous man named Preston Marsh, and snapped his fingers. "Bring up the full Sentinel model. Every page." Marsh hesitated. "Nathaniel, that's proprietary. We don't bring it up," Cross said, and Marsh connected his laptop to the projector with hands that were not entirely steady. 17 pages filled the screen. 14 months of work from a team of 12. "Here's the deal," Cross said, turning back to Danny, his voice carrying the weight of a man convinced he was about to end this permanently. "Walk through the entire model. Find every error if there are any, right here on camera. Get it all correct, and I will personally write you a check for $50,000 tonight." The room gasped audibly. "But if you are wrong even once, even on a single decimal, you will apologize to me in front of everyone, on camera, and you will never work in this city again." A man at a side table muttered, "Just let the poor girl go home. This is cruel." The woman beside him laughed. "Cruel? It's entertainment." She walked into this herself. Danny looked at the 17 pages glowing on the screen. Stochastic calculus layered over Bayesian inference, feeding into tail risk simulations. Most professional quants would need a week to properly audit. This was not a party trick anymore. 50,000, she said. 50,000, Cross repeated. "Can the cameras stay on the whole time?" she asked. "The whole world can watch," he said, spreading his hands. "Then I'll need a bigger whiteboard," Danny said. And the room erupted into noise, chairs scraping, phones rising, a producer near the wall speaking urgently into a headset. "Keep every camera rolling. Do not cut." 2 more whiteboards were wheeled in and lined up beside the first 6 feet of blank surface, waiting for ink. The live stream counter, visible on a monitor near the door, climbed past 40,000 viewers, then 80,000, then past the 100,000 mark inside 11 minutes. A hashtag had already started forming online. Waitress versus billionaire. Danny began on page 1. She re-derived the base assumptions clean, the interest rate inputs, the volatility surface, the correlation structure. No gaps, no hesitation. Every line following the last like links, pulled tight in a chain. Page 1 held. Page 2, she flagged a small inconsistency in the volatility smile calibration, corrected it in 3 lines, a rounding shortcut that quietly biased every number after it. Page 4, another shortcut, a correlation matrix that assumed static relationships between assets that were, in reality, moving targets. She rewrote the block using a time-varying structure. 4 minutes. Clean. Cross leaned toward a guest and said, "Loud enough for the front row. She's stalling, buying time. Watch, she'll start making things up soon." Nobody near him laughed this time. Page 8. Danny found something larger, a resampling procedure using overlapping windows that quietly introduced false confidence into the model's error bars. Once corrected, The 93% accuracy Cross had bragged about all evening dropped to 71. Marsh leaned toward his boss and whispered, "Nathaniel, we should stop this now." "No," Cross said, his voice ablaze. "She finishes. And when she makes one mistake, it's over." But Danny was not making mistakes. She was moving through the model like water, finding every crack in a dam, page after page. Faster now, her rhythm locked in scan, identify, correct, move. By page 15, the live stream had crossed 600,000 viewers. A financial news anchor had posted the stream to her own account with the caption, "Is anyone else watching this waitress dismantle a billion-dollar model live?" Then, at page 16, with 2 minutes left on the clock, Cross himself had set, Danny stopped cold. Not a pause, a full stop, the kind where the hand freezes and something goes cold down the spine. "Where did the data on this page come from?" she asked. "It came from the model," Cross said, "same as every other page." "No," Danny said slowly, "it didn't. The base parameters here don't match pages 14 and 15. Someone manually overrode the convergence constant from 0.062 to 0.099. That override makes this entire page mathematically impossible to solve. You could run it 1,000 times and it would never converge. This page was built to fail. The room went cold in a way no air conditioning could explain. "You gave me a rigged test," Danny said, turning to face him directly. Cross did not answer, and Marsh, beside him, exhaled slowly through his nose, like a man watching a building come down from the inside. Online, the word rigged appeared in the comment stream 1,000 times inside 10 seconds. Viewers were already tagging journalists, tagging the SEC's public account, screenshotting the override before Danny had even said another word. She was not finished. In the next 90 seconds, she reversed the override, restored the original constant, rebuilt the convergence pathway from nothing, and solved the equation that had been designed never to be solved. The clock read 44 minutes and 11 seconds when she capped the marker. 19 seconds to spare. "Page 16, she said. "Done." Nathaniel Cross stared at the board with his mouth open and nothing coming out. For the first time all evening, he had absolutely nothing to say, and that silence lasted exactly as long as it took him to find his anger again. "She cheated," he said, the words landing like a slap across a room that had been slowly tilting away from him for 44 minutes. "There is no possible way. A waitress with no degree and no training walks in here and audits a model built by 12 PhDs. She had access beforehand. Someone leaked it." "Find out who," he snapped at Marsh, who looked like a man being asked to locate a lifeboat on a ship that had already gone under. The restaurant's general manager, a tall man named Corbin Ellis, with the permanently anxious face of someone who had spent his career absorbing other people's tempers, walked straight up to Danny. "Miss Carter, I need you to step away from the presentation area." "I didn't cheat," she said. "That's not mine to decide," Ellis said quietly. "Mr. Cross is our client tonight. Collect your things. You're finished here." Danny stood in the middle of the room, 3 whiteboards covered edge to edge behind her, a projector still glowing with a model she had just taken apart piece by piece, 100,000 strangers watching on a stream she could not even see. And now she was being told to leave, not because she was wrong, but because she had been right and the wrong person did not like it. She looked around at the faces that had laughed at her an hour earlier, the ones who had filmed her, the ones who had whispered about calling her manager. Not one of them spoke up for her now. The loneliest place in the world, she would think later, is a room full of people who know you are right and choose to say nothing anyway. She thought about Tasha, at home, 14 years old, cross-legged on that same pull-out couch, watching her sister get walked out on a live stream in front of the whole internet. What would Tasha learn from that? That none of it mattered. That the truth didn't count for anything against enough money. Danny reached for her apron, where she had set it on a chair, and instead of folding it away, she tied it back on. "I didn't cheat," she said again, quieter this time. Not to Cross, not to Ellis, but to the cameras, to the 100,000 people watching, to a 14-year-old on a couch off East Riverside. And I can prove it. Give me a problem nobody in this room has ever seen. Let anyone here choose it, and I will solve it right now, with nothing but this marker. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then a voice came from the back of the room, calm and unhurried, the kind of voice that had never once needed volume to be heard. I'll give her one. Every head turned. A woman rose from the last table, silver hair pinned back, no jewelry, a plain gray blazer that looked more suited to a lecture hall than a private dining room. Her name was Dr. Susan Whitfield, professor of applied mathematics at the University of Texas at Austin, a 2-time recipient of National Research Honors, invited that evening purely as a courtesy. Cross liked to extend to credentialed names. She had not said a single word all night until now. She walked to the clean section of whiteboard, picked up a red marker, and wrote out 3 lines of notation, sparse and deceptively simple, a closed-form stability problem in persistent homology that her own research group had spent nearly 3 years chasing without success. "Take as long as you need," she said, and there was no condescension in it at all. Only one mathematician speaking to another. Danny read the problem once, then twice, her lips moving slightly the way they did when she mapped a problem's architecture in her head. The live stream had crossed 1.2 million viewers. Nobody in the comment section typed anything for almost a full minute. 1 million people held their breath together. Then Danny picked up the marker and began. She defined the filtration structure cleanly, standard groundwork, and then did something nobody in that room expected. She reframed the entire problem, mapping it into a secondary metric space using a Lipschitz continuous function, showing the original stability question was equivalent to a contraction mapping problem in the new space entirely. It was the kind of lateral leap that does not come from studying harder. It comes from a mind that has spent years seeing structure where other people only see noise. 4 clean steps later, she underlined a final inequality twice and set the marker down. Dr. Whitfield walked to the board and traced the proof from the first line to the last with 1 finger, the way a jeweler checks a stone for a flaw that would change everything. She reached the end. She read it again. Then she turned to the room. "This is correct," she said, and something trembled underneath the 2 words. "This is not only correct. This is a novel approach. It has never been published. My own department has worked on this exact bound for nearly 3 years without success." She turned to Danny. "Where did you study?" "I didn't," Danny said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing that happened all night. Then the room broke apart into Denoise, the junior analyst, on his feet, clapping first. Then Higgins, then a woman near the front, with tears running openly down her face. Then all 31 of them standing, some clapping hard enough to whiten their knuckles. The live stream comment section became a wall of fire. Over 2 million messages in under a minute. the words "math genius" trending in 14 countries before the applause even finished. Dr. Whitfield raised a hand, and the room quieted. "I want to be clear about something," she said, facing the cameras now. "What this young woman just did is not a lucky guess, and it is not a party trick. She produced a novel proof to an open problem that has resisted some of the best mathematicians in this country, including me." She turned to Danny. "I am offering you a full scholarship, effective immediately. Tuition, housing, a research stipend, and a place in my own lab as a graduate researcher." Danny's hand went to her mouth. For a moment, she could not speak at all. The night was not finished with Nathaniel Cross yet. A man in a dark suit rose from a side table, James Holloway, a securities attorney who had sat silent all evening, watching, recording, noting. "Mr. Cross," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the noise, "you made a public wager on a live stream in front of—" He checked his phone. 2.1 million viewers. $50,000 if she found the errors in your model. She did. She also demonstrated that page 16 was deliberately altered to produce a false result, which raises very serious questions about what your investors were and were not told tonight. The wager is binding. I would strongly suggest you honor it on camera right now, before this becomes considerably more expensive than $50,000. Cross looked at Holloway. He looked at the cameras. He looked at 2 million strangers watching him through a lens he could no longer control. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a checkbook, and wrote the number in silence, his hand steady, his jaw anything but. He tore the check free and held it out without meeting her eyes. "I underestimated you," he said. It was not an apology. It was the first honest sentence he had spoken all night. "Most people do," Danny said. She untied her apron for the last time and set it gently on the table where, 3 hours earlier, she had been pouring water nobody thanked her for. Higgins caught her before she reached the door and pressed a card into her hand. "Call me Monday," he said. "I fund real scholarships, not bets." 2 more investors followed, with cards of their own, their expressions nothing like the ones that had been laughing an hour before. 6 months later, Danny Carter sat in the front row of a lecture hall on the UT Austin campus. Her first paper, on stability bounds in persistent homology, was accepted by a leading mathematics journal, and the reviewers called it a landmark contribution to the field. She still carried a 90-cent spiral notebook in her bag out of habit. Though the kitchen floor was gone, the cracked phone screen was gone, and the apron hung, folded in a drawer she rarely opened. Cross Capital Partners was under formal SEC review within the month. 3 former employees came forward within the year, describing a pattern of manipulated projections dating back years, and by the following spring, the firm had quietly dissolved, its offices leased out to a company that made office furniture. Nathaniel Cross never once said the words "I was wrong." He told a reporter the whole episode was blown out of proportion by people looking for a headline. He never got the headline he wanted. He got a different one. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the world to notice them. Danny Carter picked up a marker one Tuesday night in June and made the world look whether it wanted to or not. I keep coming back to this story because of how ordinary it almost stayed. How many people are out there right now, carrying trays, mopping floors, solving problems in notebooks nobody will ever open? Talent has never once cared about your zip code, your last name, or what your mother did for a living to keep the lights on. If this story moved you, even a little, share it with somebody today. Somebody out there needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments about a time somebody underestimated you and got it wrong. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because stories like this one deserve to be told. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.